Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the #1 resource for actors and talent seekers. I am your host, Jack Smart, awards editor at Backstage, and I'm here to guide you through every aspect of the entertainment industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. These intimate, inspirational conversations with today's most award-worthy film, television, and theater artists provide you, dear listener, advice on how to live the creative life, personal stories of success and failure alike, and maybe, just maybe, a tantalizing glimpse in the envelope. Did you just disappear?
I just went to record.
This is a perfect intro for our voiceover deep dive of an episode today.
It is. Faffing around with microphones and interfaces.
Exactly.
And technology.
Voiceover actors have to do this all the time. In fact, everyone has to do this all the time now in the pandemic.
Yes, indeed. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. How are you?
Yes, same. Just sort of managing to, cope.
We're definitely including everything we've just said. Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to Jamie and I figuring out technology after 3 years of doing this podcast.
Yeah, you'd think we'd be better at this by now, right?
But no, it seems fitting for today's voiceover episode. So just to give listeners a little bit of an intro, we've spoken about voiceover more and more on this podcast, and we're trying to make it a recurring almost series where every couple of episodes we air weekly. Every couple of episodes we want to touch base on voiceover. Jamie, can I put you on the spot and ask you why that is? We've talked about it before, but what's the state of voiceover in 2020? What's going on today? What's you as a voice actor extraordinaire? What's your take on the latest?
Well, yeah, like you say, we've talked about it before, but it is sort of as booming as it has ever been in some respects, because film and TV production is sort of slowly coming back to life a little bit, but, in bubbles and with, extreme sanitation measures and stuff like that. But voiceover has carried on since, it hasn't really stopped in many respects. Right. Of course, it's changed. A lot of people, everyone's now pretty much recording from home. Mm-hmm. Some studios are now up and running with very careful safety measures in place, of course. But people have bodged together home studios in closets, under duvets, behind sofas, under cushions, and are now working from home that way. And with some of the various connection services and things like that, directors are able to listen in okay quality, in brilliant quality. It's a real mix of technologies. And the advertising world is completely up and running, and video games are booming. Video games.
And you mentioned dubbing for foreign films and such.
Yeah, dubbing, particularly in animation, anime dubbing and things like that, where there's, I think Funimation, which is a studio in Texas. Okay. I think they put out something like 20 episodes a week of various, anime shows that all require American dubs.
I see. English speaking. Yeah. Okay.
English-speaking audience, yeah, that's right. And they figured out a way. They actually mailed out. I'm writing an article right now, so this is sort of right on the tip of my tongue.
For Backstage, perfect.
Yeah, for Backstage, yeah. They actually mailed out kits to talent with microphones, iPad, software, stands, pop shields, everything. Right. And they've rigged up a system where the talent can record themselves, and it's all synced up to the lip flaps, is what it's called in dubbing.
Okay.
And yeah,
lip flap for real?
Yeah, no, that's what it's called.
You learn something new every day. Okay, amazing. Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting world right now, and I have to say I feel very privileged to work in voiceover, that we haven't been so affected, because I know that, of course, theatre actors and on-screen actors are going through a very hard time right now.
Yes, and it is almost like you have a bit of a head start on the voiceover biz. Listeners have heard recently that Christine McKenna-Torella, our new Backstage casting insider, stay tuned to the end of today's episode to hear from her on a little bit about all things Backstage voiceover. I have to mention, Jamie, you heard of our Backstage Sound Stories competition, right?
I have. Yeah. Sounds great.
It's so cool. And I'm going to read a thing here. for listeners who didn't hear from last week's Sound Stories, challenges you to write, cast, record, edit, and submit a story fully told through sound. And what I'm super excited about today is we're going to include this in today's episode article in the description. We now have a Now Casting, which is our Backstage's kind of recurring feature where we outline some of the casting listings like each week. We have a Now Casting that is devoted entirely to the submitted Sound Stories competitors that now need talent for their projects. So it's all coming full circle over on Backstage.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the submissions.
The deadline for submissions is October 25. And again, listeners, stick around to after today's episode to hear from Christine. But Jamie, I also wanted to ask you today about today's episode because we are trying something a little different.
Yes.
When was the last time you listened to it in the envelope episode from 2017?
Well, about a couple of hours ago when I was editing it. But before that, it's been quite a while.
Same.
Yeah, it was fun to listen back, almost, afresh, some of these interviews.
It was more fun than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
So episode 3 of In the Envelope, which aired May 2017, I believe, we are going to, listeners, we're going to excerpt the voiceover bits from that episode featuring Hank Azaria. It's both a long time. In some ways, this podcast hasn't changed at all, and in others, it's changed a lot. And I think sometimes for the better.
As a lot of people have mentioned, April feels like 19 years ago.
Exactly.
So, 2017 is like a whole other world.
Well, and that's the thing. Like we kind of thought we've been toying with this idea of Jamie and I've been calling it a Frankenstein episode for a while, where we are re-airing episodes that have already aired to encourage listeners to go back and listen to them in full. But also, it just really lent itself well to these voiceover deep dives. So we're going to hear from Hank Azaria, and then we're going to hear from Pamela Adlon, which was a 2018 interview. And then I think we're going to hear from more recent interview, which was Maya Rudolph.
Yeah.
All stars in their own right. And in fact, all winners of one of the industry's highest distinctions of VO talent, which is the Voiceover Performance Emmy. And in fact, Maya Rudolph is the reigning winner in that category. So.
Yeah. She wears like a heavy belt with microphones strapped to it or whatever they give them.
But first we're going to get to Hank Azaria. Jamie, is there anything else we should prime listeners on?
Well, the Hank Azaria was an early interview when we were experimenting with phone calls.
Sound, okay.
So
yes.
it's a phone interview, so prepare yourself for that. It's not super high fidelity, but you can hear Hank hear his glorious pipes.
Exactly.
But not quite in full resolution that you may be used to.
And in fact, we talk about his show Brockmire, which just aired its 4th and final season. So Brockmire is actually still for your consideration. Yeah, it's sort of cool. Like Hank Azaria is in the era of when we were just starting out and we were using phone calls. Pamela Adlon was in person in the studio, and I believe it was in LA. Yeah. And then now Maya Rudolph is like a sample of the third era, which is COVID remote.
It's like a little tasting menu of interviews.
It is. We're going to see how this format works. It's a tasting menu of voiceover craft and career advice, and we couldn't not re-air it to continue with this kind of theme of diving deep into voiceover. So, Jamie, thank you as always for connecting us over the magic of voiceover technology.
My pleasure.
And for your expertise.
Well, I don't know about that.
I do. Oh, and when your Backstage Expert article comes out, we will link to that in a future episode.
Sounds
Listeners
good.
Can continue to expect these voiceover deep dives, and I'm hoping to book more people like Hank and Pamela and Maya.
All right, brilliant.
All right, we have an ending somewhere in there.
Yeah, I know, we stopped about 3 times. Hello, this is Jamie, the producer of the podcast, and I just want to take some time to tell you about the sister podcast to In the Envelope, which is VO School. This is a podcast that I produce and host, and it is devoted entirely to voiceover. So if you're looking to get into the voiceover industry, you should check it out. That's VO School, found on iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual places, and it's hosted by me. Each episode covers a different subject, and we go through the business, the craft, the marketing, the blood, sweat and tears that is creating a voiceover career. So check us out, the VO School podcast, available now.
I grew up really mostly in front of the television. That's where I took in Monty Python, where I took in baseball, where I took in Bugs Bunny, where I took in the Brady Bunch, Johnny Carson, I mean, everything. Imitated it, found I could mimic stuff at a pretty young age. this was one of the voices I imitated, was this, what I call the generic baseball announcer voice in the 70s, really generic announcer voice, not just baseball.
Yeah.
And not just sports. Always thought it would be a funny, it stuck out to me as it's kind of hilarious in its own way if you put it in the proper context. Only took 30, 40 years, but I eventually figured out what context would be funny for this guy.
Well, and I've heard you say that most, if not all, of your voiceover performances are based on this crazy, uncanny ability you have to imitate the people you hear, everyone you hear, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess all vocal work is imitation on some level. And if you're trying to do a faithful French accent or British accent or, Polish accent, you're imitating what you're hearing. Once you get into mimicry, it's into specific, right, folks, like whether it's Matthew McConaughey or, Al Pacino, whoever you're imitating, mimicking. And that's a sort of special skill that you either can do or you can't. You're kind of genetically capable of that. If you have plastic vocal cords or you don't. To some extent, you can develop it, but I think that it's sort of something you're either born able to do or you aren't, which I was. And so, yeah, I find that most of my voices on The Simpsons or everywhere are either very good or very bad impressions of people. I tell young, vocal performers this all the time. A bad vocal impression is still a lovely character voice on its own, just because it's not, if you're imitating your Uncle Steve, even if it's not a very good impression of him, if I heard you go, your Uncle Steve doesn't really sound like that, it might be a very interesting character voice, and the general public doesn't care if it sounds a lot like your Uncle Steve or not.
Right. And you can create an interesting character using that as kind of the base to build on.
Exactly.
Your involvement in The Simpsons is always so interesting to me, like how you weren't you didn't have a ton of voiceover experience before that gig. And now it's funny you say that there's tons of rejections even at the highest level and there's going to be lulls. I mean, you've been on this show since it first started airing. How did you get involved and how did that kind of carve your place in Hollywood? Yeah,
I really did win the show business lottery the day that I got that job, because although it wasn't that apparent back in that day, 30 years ago, I had done another job for Fox Television. This was back in the days of Roger Rabbit. Everybody was trying to make some kind of combination of animation with live action, and Fox did a pilot like that where this dog called Hollywood Dog was animated. I did the voice of it. That was a failed pilot that never saw the light of day, but Fox became familiar with me because of that, and there was an open audition it was an open call like you would read in Backstage, but it was an audition for the voice of Mo the bartender, and because the casting director had heard of me from that, I went in and read for it and got the job. But that was, it was a voiceover gig in the early days of Fox. You never knew that any show was going to last, let alone last for 30 years. Right. It wasn't until about a year or two into The Simpsons, that they made me a regular. And then it wasn't until a few years into the job that I realized, wow, I'm part of not only a steady gig, but kind of a cultural phenomenon. And then it's just the gift that kept giving over the years. Yeah. And I learned a ton, especially from all of them over there, but especially from Dan Castellaneta, who does the voice of Homer and others, and Harry Shearer, who does Mr. Burns, and many others. Those guys were such master craftsmen of doing vocal work that, watching them do it for years and their commitment, and how on the one hand it was very easy for them and they had a very light touch, on the other hand they were very diligent about how they went about things. Not to mention for a voice guy, which I am but didn't even know I was. Right. It was it's like a lab. It was like every week I was called on to do 2, 3, 4 new voices year after year, and it's like an incredible training ground for a vocal character actor. I mean, right. So whatever skill I had got really honed, doing that.
Which is true of a gig where you have multiple characters to play. You have one gig, but multiple characters.
Yeah. Then I found that, then having done that for a few years, then studying with Roy London really kind of deepened that kind of that was sort of all about for me being myself, not being a voice or not being funny, but just kind of being myself on stage, which I was much more uncomfortable doing than, doing the voice of Chief Wiggum or something. But when I started, to combine those two skills of bringing myself to a role and then also providing an amusing voice for it, that I found, I even found my Simpsons work, my vocal work got funnier, got better. And to bring the conversation full circle, that's really what I feel like I'm getting into with Brockmire. It's a funny voice, it's a fun imitation, and it's funny just to listen to. But I feel like the work I did with Roy and the acting work I've done for 30 years, I get to really kind of bring all that to bear. It's very satisfying on that level.
Absolutely. I mean, the show is hilarious, and you have these really hilarious zingers, but it's also, he is very much a real grounded character, and there's some really dark, uncomfortably dark elements to it. So I hear what you're saying about you're bringing the personal to it at the same time that you're able to not hide behind a voice, but use a voice to get at that truth.
Yeah, or sometimes both, and I was fortunate enough to hook up with a really wonderful young writer named Joel Church Cooper, who kind of saw more depth and darkness in it than I did even when I created the character. And with a really extraordinary director named Tim Kirkby, who's done a ton of stuff, but is very, very gifted at being sensitive to and aware of and capturing all characters, the kind of the emotional truth and darkness, as you just said, of people, while not losing the joke or losing the comedy pacing or, losing the surface of what needs to be there. But he's highly aware of the depth of the thing, which really came through, I think, as well.
Well, and so what is great acting to you?
I'll answer the way my late great acting teacher, Roy London, would answer that. He would say that great actors, they are willing on a stage or on camera to share their honest self, to be really authentically who they are in front of people, which sounds like a simple thing. But like I said, for me, I was comfortable. I became an actor because I wanted to be other people besides myself. I wanted to imitate, others, Woody Allen, Al Pacino, De Niro, Steve Martin. I wanted to mimic and imitate, and I found I could mimic them rather convincingly. So that's what I wanted to do. Much to my chagrin, I discovered that to be a good actor, let alone be a great actor, you needed to kind of share yourself honestly in front of people. And I was very uncomfortable doing that. I had this kind of deep-seated belief that not only was I not comfortable doing it, and I was afraid to do it, but I had a belief that it was uninteresting. But, De Niro is interesting. Who am I? So, but it wasn't until Roy convinced me that, look, that might be true, but it's all I have, really. Those are the only colors I can paint with are who I really am. And it was only until I really gave into that and was willing to just kind of honestly be myself in any given role, even if I was sounding like Jim Brockmire or sounding like Agador from The Simpsons or like the French Taunter in Monty Python, whatever. I had to, Hank had to be who I really was, had to be the motor of all that. The great, the De Niros and Streeps and Gene Hackmans and Bryan Cranstons of the world are willing to do that in every given moment. Pretty great to watch.
Hey there, listeners. It's Jack checking in again. This is 2020 Jack. You just heard from Hank Azaria. I encourage you, listeners, to go back through our archives and listen to episode 3 of In the Envelope. It featured this Hank Azaria interview in full, but also we paired that with an interview with Elizabeth Moss. This was when The Handmaid's Tale was brand new. That was also a great interview. And just for those of you who are tuning in for the voiceover advice here, Elizabeth Moss also addressed voiceover. It was in the context of Handmaid's Tale. There's some great stuff in there too. So check it out. Go back and listen to the full episode 3 all the way back in 2017. But up next, continuing this tour of old In the Envelope episodes featuring voiceover advice, we have Pamela Adlon, who won an Emmy for playing a teenage boy in the animated show King of the Hill, and is, of course, the writer, director, producer, star of Better Things on FX, which just aired its 4th season this year. This is another one. I encourage you to go back to listen to it in full. Fantastic craft and career advice, but what we have excerpted for you here is just her thoughts and her kind of journey through voiceover. So I will let Pamela and 2018 Jack take it away.
You know, I got into voiceover when I lived a few streets over in this area.
Oh, awesome.
I was on unemployment because I wasn't getting hired. I wasn't even getting, auditions. And
Wow.
I somehow was lucky enough to start, somebody heard my voice in something.
Right.
A man, Paul Doherty at Cunningham, CESD, and he called me in to read some copy, and it was like I was like Lana Turner, and he Schwabsed me.
Yeah.
And so I came in and I read copy, and it was a campaign for 7-Eleven, and I played this boy named Kevin, young Kevin, and I did that campaign for years.
Oh, cool.
And then I started doing a lot of radio. And I really wanted to get into animation.
Right.
And I remember doing an episode. I somehow got an episode of Rugrats. And I was in the green room with Kath Soucie, E.G. Daly, Cree Summer, and Chris Kavanaugh, rest in peace.
Yes.
And I looked at all of them, and there was like a phone in there. This is pre-cell phones. And I thought, oh my God, they do this.
Right.
They
This is your
do
first,
this.
Yeah.
I
seeing this.
wanted to do it so badly.
Cool.
So then I started, booking more and more. And then I couldn't get booked in radio. Like there was some delineation, like
Gotcha.
you're good for radio ads, campaigns, and you don't really work
like
in
voice
animation.
character. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then that Rugrats moment, that was kind of like you noticed, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And
I went to Klasky Chupo and I was like, I want to hang out here.
but there was no formal training. There was no like voiceover. It was very much learning on the job.
That's right.
Yeah.
For me, I feel that if anyone's listening to this and wants any kind of pro tips, which is so valuable to me, anything that's practical, if you have confidence, it gets you. I know that's a boring old adage, but it's true. So, like, literally, you could be like, I could be in a booth with John DiMaggio, Billy West,
Yes.
Jeff Bennett, Kevin Michael Richardson, and if you're not completely, laying yourself bare and trying everything and not being self-conscious, you're going to do as well as everybody. And I feel that with voiceover, I've always said this, it's not really, my voice is what got me in the door.
Right.
But it's really about my ear.
Ah, cool.
Which is when you can hear something and you have a fine-tuned sense. I think that voiceover artists have the best ear.
Yeah, they're the best listeners.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and you were doing the cupping your ear thing.
That's
to
right.
hear your own voice.
Yes, that's
a
the
technique
Gary
of-
Owens. You cup your ear.
I can't stand the sound of my own voice, and I'm a podcast host.
I love your voice.
Oh, gosh, Pamela Adlon. What was the deal with you playing, I guess it's just because of the nature of your voice, you played a lot of boys.
Yes.
And you even, there's a story about an audition where you revealed yourself to be a girl, like, well into the audition or something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, please, that old saw. That was me in the 80s.
As a kid, or?
Yeah, I did a ton of gender bendy kind of stuff.
Very punk rock.
Yeah, it was very it was in the early 80s and my hair was shorn off.
Cool, yeah.
And I was so androgynous. It was the second time I had a short haircut. First time was when I was 10. And I was able to do like a lot of stuff. So like I was on Night Court. And the character was that bull Richard Mole, the big bailiff in the show, he wanted to foster a kid, and I was pretending to be a boy the whole episode.
Right.
And then Selma Diamond, rest in peace, finds me in the bathroom, and then at the end there's a big reveal.
Right.
And I'm wearing a dress, and John Larroquette says, "What? A boy in a dress? Big deal." So, and then I did, Red Fox Show. I did this this musical called Backstage, and I did this movie called Bad Manners, and in the credits they had to write "Girl Stevie." So people would know.
Yeah.
And then on the Jeffersons, I robbed the dry cleaners, and nobody. And I was Tony, and so they had to say, "Girl," who cares?
Totally. And it seems like voiceover, that's where gender swapping is happening.
I never realized that I had transitioned from being an on camera, kind of gender morphed person to doing all the animation. My voice sits in a naturally male pocket.
Yeah, in between.
So, and then there's this thing that, if you cast a real 12-year-old boy or 11-year-old boy or 13-year-old boy, their voice is going to change.
Definitely, yes.
So,
so it's smarter to invest in you for whatchamacallit.
Yeah, because my balls aren't dropping. They're just remaining in my throat.
Exactly. And King of the Hill, you've said it really changed your career.
Yeah, that was...
It launched your career, I guess.
It was, there's a few places that I can see are the posts.
The junctures.
Yeah.
Yeah. What should an actor who's new to voiceover know about a voiceover audition, especially versus a more typical audition?
Just don't marry yourself to the idea of what you're gonna do, because they will change it in a heartbeat the second you get into a room, if you're auditioning in a studio, or if you're sending in an audition by phone or an MP3 or whatever, or you have your own home studio or you're at somebody else's. Give two different takes.
Oh, cool.
And let them, pitch your voice up, or take the gravel out, or
those are the kind of notes they give of
sure,
try it more like this. Or...
And when you're doing voiceover, if it's animation, you got to keep the pace going.
Okay.
And keep the color in your voice. And my thing is natural. But I have a tendency to speak really slowly, and you got to keep the pace going,
right? Because
you're thinking about having your eyes shut your eyes, listen to yourself.
These are great tips. Oh my gosh.
Cool.
And I don't know anything about voice. I've never done voiceover acting or anything. What other advice do you have for those just starting out?
Take classes. Take a class. If in terms of voiceover, sign yourself up for a class that leaves you with a demo at the end. All of those classes are fantastic.
Okay, cool.
You can sign up for an ad class, doing radio,
right,
or animation. Vet the people. If you're going to invest your money in a class, do the research. Go on Yelp. A really good idea is to try to find a working animation director or actor who's teaching. So I think my friend D. Bradley Baker has a website, and he gives pro tips, and Andrea Romano teaches classes, Ginny McSwain, Charlie Adler.
They're working artists.
These are working professionals, directors, actors.
They're keeping abreast of the latest trends and technologies and all of that. Yeah. It's the kind of world that I think a lot of actors are under the impression that it's almost a quick fix. I can just record an audiobook. And just become a voiceover star. I'm wondering if there are any other like preconceptions or cliches about the voiceover industry that should be corrected.
You know, it's the greatest job if you can get it. But it's difficult sometimes if you're doing like a toy or a game. It's repetitive, and you're going to be in there for 4 hours solid.
Wow.
You know, toys and games take it out of you. And don't start a voice that you can't sustain for 4 hours. That's going to tickle your throat or do something weird.
That's excellent advice. You have to take care of your voice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, hot water, lemon, honey.
Mm-hmm. All the remedies.
The grandma.
They work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. On our third and final stop of this tour through old throwback episodes of In the Envelope, we are going to take it to a much more recent addition to the archives of In the Envelope. Maya Rudolph joined us recently after receiving her 3 Emmy nominations for the year 2020 for her work in television. She has since won 2 of those 3 Emmys, one for Saturday Night Live and one for Big Mouth, which is the Netflix show where she plays the hormone monstrous Connie, and had great things to say about that in this interview. Let's just hear a quick snippet of her thoughts on voiceover before we get to our segment with Backstage casting insider Christine McKenna-Torella. So here is that snippet with Maya. I encourage you to go back and listen to that interview in full. And congrats to her on her Emmy Awards. And in terms of creating characters, I have to ask about voiceover as well. You're, first of all, the judge on The Good Place. It's another Emmy-nominated performance in the same category. It's my favorite part about The Good Place. But can I ask about Big Mouth? Because that is such a voice. I think of that as such a, like, that, correct me if I'm wrong, like took a lot of work to construct and a lot of work to like get into a character.
I don't even know. I don't remember. You know, it's funny because that character was not what I was hired to play on Big Mouth. I was hired to play Nick's mom, Diane, and Fred Armisen and I play his parents, Elliot and Diane. And I think it was like the second or third episode, I don't remember. And they said that Nick played a hormone monster and they needed me to play Jesse's female hormone monstress. And it was so funny. And it's always really hard to come up with a new voice because you don't really know if you're going to find something that works or if you like it or if they like it. And we did try to figure it out together for a while there. And then we kind of found her game pretty quickly, that she really eats up, you know, bees and you know, like that, and and syllables, and that her tone of voice is a bit roller coastery, which is fitting for her hormone roller coaster ride. And then it just became this thing that like was making us all so happy. I didn't realize that I was creating a new character, but you know, Connie got a lot of love, and so they kept bringing her back. It's the first, I think it's the first character I've ever created that people get a tattoo of now. I've never.
Oh my gosh! Yes. You see your animated character on people's bodies.
Yeah, they're poor parents.
And I love this. What you said about it. Is it a game? Especially, is that voiceover? Or is that acting in general? Like what is the game of the character? I guess
the game in terms of like what I'm after.
Or like you said, the game of her voice was the bees, and that's the end.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think for her, she's got a very melodic voice for sure. Yeah. I think the elements of her being a monster and her being hormonal. I was trying to create this game of like highs and lows, as well as big. She's big and hairy. Cool. You know, she's a big hairy lady, and also, you know, very like sexual and unapologetically big and hairy. You know, she likes the smell of her own stink, kind of lady. So that requires a much bigger voice than my own. Luckily, I have a nice and low voice if I try to make a voice. So I was really kind of trying to massage that out of her. But she's like one of the most fun characters I've ever gotten to do. And that really speaks a lot to the joy of doing voiceover and animation is that you can really be anything. And I love that there's a place to perform where you are given that freedom, and that room to really, go outside of your own physicality.
Totally.
To create something.
Like voiceover is still a place where you can do that elevating to like Connie is what you were saying earlier about the female character who's bigger than she's a diva. I guess.
You should see, I can't remember her name, but there's a drag queen that does Connie. That's amazing. Amazing. And then it started like people started remixing Connie saying bubble bath and
yes, bubble bath.
It's pretty. It's my dream.
It's your dream. I love that you're a fan of drag. It like something clicked. It's like it makes sense that
it does make sense, right? It does. And it's sort of like I think so many actors, when you talk about it, really will all admit to this imposter syndrome that we all kind of feel like we don't really belong. Yeah. We don't know what we're doing. We don't fit in. We're not good enough and blah, 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 blah. And I think that definitely is sort of like an Achilles heel for me is this sort of idea of femininity. And I think one of the amazing things that I discovered about my own strength is that without being aware of it, I created something stronger out of what I think was probably what I saw as a deficiency, or you just felt really, and created something that's almost like kind of like a superhero,
Yeah.
And I love that. And I love, it speaks a lot to like our own personal ability to survive and to protect ourselves. And
totally.
Get through this life, in a way where we can feel stronger.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. It's helpful to think of acting in that way as somewhere that you can explore your vulnerability and protect yourself.
Yeah. I like to hide.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Maya. I like to hide.
And now it's time to hear from Christine McKenna-Torella, our Backstage casting insider. I will let her take it away.
Hi guys, Christine McKenna-Torella here. I'm inspired by this week's topic of voiceover. It's so topical, first of all. We've got so many casting calls on this site. And secondly, well, I've got a confession to make. I still haven't been able to listen to myself on this podcast yet. And In the Envelope is one of my favorite podcasts, so it's quite hard not to listen. I can make excuses. I can say, it's because I'm terribly busy and I know what I've said. But in reality, it's because I'm a new voiceover artist and I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable about whether or not I sound good, whether or not I've said the right things, and whether or not it's a performance that I am proud to share, right? I'm cringing just thinking about it. Putting my casting director hat back on, I have to give myself the same advice that I give to every artist that I work with. And it's that we have to do a digital audit of ourselves. May that be audio reels or video reels, whatever we're sharing with the universe, whatever we're putting up as the material that we are auditioning with, we have to be proud of it. We've got to know that it's the standard at which we want to work at. And so I'm inspired to go back and make sure that I really listen and help myself learn and get better. It's the only way to grow as an artist. This week with voiceovers, I've decided to highlight some of the amazing editorial and video content that we already have on the subject. So if you're a complete novice like me to voiceover, or you're voiceover curious, visit our extensive voiceover guide. It has topics from the type of material that you're going to cover, the type of vocabulary that's used for voiceover, which is very different to an in-person audition, what type of equipment you might need to buy. It's a multiple page article that we update all the time. So it truly is a comprehensive guide to all things voiceover. Secondly, head over to our YouTube, where our industry expert Laurie Burke has a series on voiceovers. Just to highlight a few of those, how to get into voiceover is one of the topics. What makes a standout voiceover reel? I feel like I get that question all the time, and Laurie answers it so beautifully. And then how to record the best sounding voiceover from home, which is so incredibly relevant right now. Now for the good news. Last month, we saw a record-breaking amount of voiceover casting calls. This is partly to do with the amount of work-from-home opportunities, but it's also to do with the fact that we've listened to our clients and our actors' feedback, and we've really built out the voiceover features. So if you haven't visited Backstage.com recently for voiceover as an actor, I just want to remind you that included in your subscription, you can have alternate profiles. So you can have, i.e., an actor profile and a separate voiceover profile, so that can be your landing page for all projects of voiceover. If you're a creator on the site, we've recently added the ability to ask for voiceover material within the initial application as part of a pre-screen for your audition. And coming very soon, I'm really excited to announce this, you're going to have the ability to request and receive recorded assets and pay talent directly on the Backstage platform. What can you imagine? If you've been in casting at all, you know how helpful it is to be able to have one place to go where you can book the talent, ask for the assets from the talent, and give them their money. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, enough of my geeking out about that as a casting professional. Okay, so if you are a creator and you're interested in hearing more information about that, we have the fabulous Sonia Smith, who is our voiceover casting specialist, and she can be reached at outreach@backstage.com. All right, and to our amazing voiceover casting calls, I've kept to the theme. So these are work from home, work from anywhere opportunity nationwide calls. We have a voiceover for a fitness spec commercial. Claro Media is looking for a middle-aged actor for a health promotional video. It is a 90% voiceover, 10% on screen, all recorded from home project. And it is $1,000 pay for just a few hours work. And then just this morning, a project came on the site that I wanted to share with you. It is the 2021 C Spire campaign. The wireless company is looking for a new voice for their 2021 season. So take a look at both of those. And lastly, whether you're a creator or a voiceover actor, check out Sound Stories on Backstage. The competition's still ongoing. I mentioned it last week on the podcast. We have incredible jurors, incredible prizes, and we've had some really cool and interesting projects that have already posted on the site. So whether you're an actor or a creator, take a look. As always, I'm going to put everything that I mentioned in the show notes. And with that, have a beautiful week.
In the Envelope is recorded at Lotus Productions and Hyperbolic Audio in New York City, and Soundbox LA, Mark Browse Studios, and Buzzies in Los Angeles. Thanks as always to our producer extraordinaire, Jamie Muffett, and to the team at Backstage, Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage by using the code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. That's right, 100% free. For more exclusive content, join us on Facebook and Twitter at In the Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who would you like us to interview next? Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another glimpse in the envelope.